Welcome into the install with Greg Cosell of NFL Films. Greg, happy to have you back for another edition of this AFC look around, AFC South look around that we've been doing the last couple of weeks. The Colts are always the boogeyman for Titans fans, at least the last probably 2 decades of football. But that series has evened up a little bit in the last couple of years between Mike Vrabel and Frank Reich.
Yeah, the Colts are a good football team. I think that they've got good players and they're well coached. Obviously, they lost their defensive coordinator and Matt Eberflus going to the Bears as head coach. So they have a new defensive coordinator. I thought, and we'll get to this shortly, Buck, I thought they had a pretty good draft. And again, I can only say that based on my evaluation of the players. That's the only way I can do it. I don't do it by saying, oh, they could have gotten that guy 4 picks later. I don't do that. All I can do is say, hey, here's how I evaluated these players as NFL prospects in transitioning and projecting them to the league. And based on the way I do it, I thought they had a very good draft.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of new faces for Indianapolis between veterans and rookies as they try and kind of figure this thing out with this core. They've had a rotating cast of characters at the quarterback spot since Andrew Luck decided to retire and for the sake of his health, it sounds like. But with a lot of different kinds of players over the last couple of years, Matt Ryan coming into quarterback, them at this stage of his career in probably unquestionably a better situation than Atlanta has had. But what do we kind of make of the veteran quarterback at this phase?
Well, Matt Ryan is just one of those guys that's a veteran and he knows how to play. He's really good before the snap of the ball. He understands everything he sees because he's seen it all. Yeah. He's a certain kind of quarterback, but he's very good at what he is. He's always been a bit of a strider. He needs to be protected. Striders need the interior of the offensive line to be strong because the interior of the offensive line controls the depth of the pocket, and he needs that room to stride. And I think, in the interior of their O-line, they've certainly got Quentin Nelson, a really good player at left guard. Center Ryan Kelly, a solid pro. Right guard might be seen as a question mark as we sit here today. Yeah. But overall, that's solid. The left tackle position is a bit of a question right now. And of course, we're speaking in later June, so we have an entire training camp to get through. But Matt Ryan needs to be protected. But one thing that he's very proficient at, he had his best year of his career under Kyle Shanahan. He's very, very proficient with the play action pass game, and obviously their offense begins with the run game, so that there will be multiple play action concepts with Matt Ryan under center, not necessarily in the gun, under center.
Yeah, it's going to be unique to see how they kind of work him and how he fits into their system, basically, because as you said, Titans and the Colts run their offense, at least in the last couple of years, in a very similar way. Now, some of that is because necessarily, I don't know how their trust may have waned in Carson Wentz towards the end of the season. It would seem that Jonathan Taylor was getting a lot more work as the season wore on. That's just purely speculation from my perspective, but you kind of take what you do away from those games. Jonathan Taylor is a special kind of a running back, though, Greg. Certainly something that Titans fans get a little bit triggered about because they love Derrick Henry, but it's okay to appreciate that there's another really, really talented player at that position in this division.
Yeah, Taylor's great back. I loved him coming out of Wisconsin. I thought he'd be a great runner. I thought in that particular draft class, he was the best runner. I think the reason he was a second-round pick is a couple of reasons. Running back's not valued as much, and people were uncertain as to his receiving skill set, which has turned out to be pretty solid. Yeah. But yeah, they're going to run the ball, and they'll run it in multiple ways: zone concepts, gap scheme concepts. And that's how their offense will start, and they'll work the pass game off that. Because the key thing about the run game is what it does to a defense as they prepare to play you, is they're preparing to defend the run, particularly in normal down and distance situations. And as a team, as you game plan for a particular opponent, how they're going to do that, because there's only certain things that teams do. If it's 1st and 10, the opposing defenses don't have 15 different defenses they line up in. Right. They might have 2, maybe 3 at most. And what they are based on your film study and your preparation. So that allows you to attack them in other ways, such as the play action pass game. But there's no question, all begins with Taylor, and they'll work off that with Matt Ryan. And Matt Ryan, as I said, when Kyle Shanahan was there, that was their Super Bowl season. Obviously, we know what Kyle Shanahan does with the run game. So Matt Ryan is extremely proficient running the conventional play action pass game, meaning under center, where he turns his back to the defense, which is a learned trait. And he's done it for a long time in his NFL career.
As far as their skill positions are concerned, Greg, outside of Taylor, this is a post Jack Doyle and probably T.Y. Hilton era. Yes. He's still out there on the unrestricted free agent market right now. But a couple of interesting draft picks with them not having a first rounder this year. They went with Alec Pierce, the wide receiver out of Cincinnati, with their first selection, second round, 53 overall. And then Jelani Woods, who we talked about a lot as far as the Titans and tight end needs, a guy who's got all the athletic potential in the world and seems to still be learning how to play the position, given that he just kind of changed over in the last couple of years.
And that's fair. Let's address the wide receivers. I really liked Alex Pierce's tape coming out of Cincinnati. He's long, he's athletic, he can run. He actually showed some nuance and detail running routes. He can make contested catches. He's 6'3". He's a big man. He's a great athlete. I mean, I've said before, based just on tape study, and maybe I was in the minority, but again, that's the way I saw it based on tape. I didn't think there was a meaningful difference between Alec Pierce and Drake London. And I was actually kind of pleased when I saw Alec Pierce go in the second round, because I thought he was extremely worthy of that pick, given what his tape showed. Now, obviously, what they hope is that he's a starter from day one. And the other hope at wide receiver is that Paris Campbell can finally be healthy. He showed some flashes a year ago before he broke his foot, because Campbell is big and can run. Yeah. They actually, if Campbell can play, they've got 3 wide receivers who are 6'2" and over. And Campbell can run, Pierce can run. Pittman's not a burner, but he's not slow. Right. So this could be a very intriguing pass receiving core if it all pans out, which is, as I said, as we speak today in later June, it is a bit of a question mark that needs to be made clear, but it could be very, very good.
Pittman's one of those who's, been I don't want to say a curiosity, but, you kind of see boom or bust from him in any given game. And some of that's quarterback dependent. Obviously, wide receiver is the most dependent position on another position on the field in that way, but he's always shown that ability, and he seems to find holes in the zone pretty well anytime you watch him, or at least against the Titans. I saw that a couple of different times.
Yeah, I like Pittman a lot. And I think one thing you'll see with Pittman, because it'll play off the run game, is I think you'll see a lot of quick in-breaking routes. I think he's a really strong physical guy. He's got a big body. He was very good run after catch. I think you'll see him used on a lot of in-breakers. And I'm curious to see how they map out the receiving core, because Pittman can play boundary X, but so can Alec Pierce. So I'm just curious how that'll work out. Pittman can line up in other spots as well, but he's very effective working on in-breakers with a big body, good hands, and not outstanding explosiveness, but he can transition from receiver to runner pretty well.
Now, on the other side of the ball, defense has been their strength in the last couple of seasons, really since they started to build around Darius Leonard and DeForest Buckner in that trade. Go ahead, Greg. Did you have something?
No, I was just going to say that I think the player that's often overlooked, and I think he's really, really good, is Bobby Okereke. He plays linebacker with Leonard. Obviously, when they're in their nickel, it's Leonard and Okereke. And Okereke, to me, is a really, really good player who doesn't get national attention because of Darius Leonard and DeForest Buckner. And he may not get a lot of attention this year with Stephon Gilmore there. But I think Okereke is a really, really good linebacker. So I think their nickel linebacker unit, the 2 players, Leonard and Okereke, that's probably a top 3 or 4 nickel linebacking unit in the league.
So with Matt Eberflus moving on, we're not sure how they're going to go about the deployment of the players. Correct. We know tendencies of certain coaches across the league, given the resume. But this is a pretty interesting group when you add in Yannick Ngakoue, who's bounced around a little bit at this point. Kwity Paye is their former first-round pick, and Deo Odangbo out of Vanderbilt here, who Had it not been for a torn Achilles, people in the league, I mean, he still went fairly high for having that injury.
Yeah, I like
But
him too.
it seemed
Strong
like a
kid.
lot of people had positive things to say. It's a pretty talented front seven, even though there's been some
Well,
turnover.
look, we know because Gus Bradley is the new D coordinator.
Mhm.
So we kind of know, you know,
Right.
Gus Bradley, look, all coordinators have changed a bit because you just can't do the same thing all the time. For instance, Gus Bradley has played a little more with split safeties, where for years he was a cover three guy, but he still plays a ton of cover three. Okay. And he'd like to be able to get to the quarterback with four and not have to pressure a whole lot.
Mhm.
Okay. So ultimately, that's what they're trying to get accomplished. That's why Ngakoue is there. Buckner's been there. Kwity Paye was a first-round pick a year ago. They expect him to take a step forward, I'm sure. So in an ideal world, you have three guys when they go nickel that can rush the quarterback. And that's Paye, Buckner, and Ngakoue. So that's what the hope is. And, you know, I think they drafted, I mean, they signed Rodney McLeod, who's a veteran safety from Philly. When he's healthy, he's just a very solid pro, probably not a star, but a really solid player. Kerry Willis retired, you know, earlier this week or last week. So McLeod could easily step in and be the starter with Julian Blackmon, although they drafted Nick Cross out of Maryland in the 3rd round. Again, you never know if a rookie is ready to start, but I think Cross has great traits and will eventually become a starter. He's big and he's fast, and he played both on the back end and in the box at Maryland.
Yeah, that Kari Willis retirement is a very, very important issue for them to address, and in signing a couple of different players to see if they can figure that out. That's going to be something critical to keep an eye on. Now, Stephon Gilmore is a famous name, and I don't think a lot of people were watching the Carolina Panthers last year, Greg. I think that, you know, he was still a good player, if not the former defensive player of the year at that position. It's just things after a 3-0 start for Carolina, they kind of snowballed, tried to get that trade right after some injuries in their secondary. I believe that was their 1st-round pick, J.C. Horn. I can't remember if J.C. Horn was the player that got injured or if there was another player at the corner position for Carolina.
Well, Horn got injured last year for sure, yes.
Right. So regardless, at this point, Stephon Gilmore is what at this stage?
Well, if I want to do it, the airplane deal, you know, in the movie, I could say Stephon Gilmore's a corner for the Indianapolis Colts, but we won't do that. We'll leave the movie Airplane out of it, but Gilmore's still a good player. You can line him up. Look, they're going to play a lot of single high, so he can play on the outside, whether it's cover 1 or cover 3. You're essentially matching up outside. He can do that. I think the question really is who's going to be the other corner in their nickel. When they're in base, it'll be Kenny Moore, who's a really, really good player. You're probably very familiar with him being, you know, in the division. He had a great interception last year against Tannehill. It was a classic case where Tannehill read man and it was zone. And you probably remember the play. And he threw it right to Kenny Moore because just Tannehill didn't read it correctly.
Right.
You know, we'll see who the other corner is. Now, keep one thing in mind. They signed Brandon Facyson, who played really well in Las Vegas last year for Gus Bradley, okay? And I think that he could end up starting opposite Gilmore in their nickel. So that's a player to keep an eye on because, as I said, he played really, really well last year, and Gus Bradley's obviously very familiar with him.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see just how the Colts kind of operate in this reboot, right? I think, Greg, they've been trying to find some kind of stability. Phillip Rivers towards the end of his career, and Carson Wentz in an effort to kind of rehabilitate that, for lack of a better term. And by the way, 27 touchdowns and 7 interceptions for Carson Wentz. You would look at that, the last 2 games notwithstanding, and say, okay, he held up pretty well, and they found ways to make that thing work. But I think on face value, they seem like they've gotten a little more stable because of what Matt Ryan brings at that specific position.
Yeah, and certainly Matt Ryan is a much more stable player. And again, that doesn't mean Matt Ryan won't make a bad throw here and there, because Matt Ryan, he's always been an aggressive thrower. He understands when you have to make aggressive throws. He's willing to turn it loose. And when you do that at times, you throw some bad balls and you get picked. But Matt Ryan, I think, you know, just from day one, you know, through every game, is just a more stable, quarterback. And I think that's what they want. Now his arm is not what it used to be. It was never great, and it's a little less now. But he's a really solid pro who understands how to play the position. And they've got pretty good personnel. As we said, the wide receiver position, it could be really good. It's an unknown right now. And I think left tackle. They drafted Bernard Raymond, and I don't know if he's ready to play right now. I think he can be a really good left tackle down the road, but they may be going with Matt Pryor right now. And quite honestly, Matt Pryor is not a starting caliber left tackle in the NFL. The tape tells you that.
Right. Raymond was I'd call him a curiosity at the Senior Bowl. Obviously, he's a giant human being and has the ability there, but I think there's a lot of rawness to them, or to him, that would kind of show up based on what he put together at Central Michigan. And that's frankly what the Titans are banking on, because as everybody else was spending money or trading for quarterbacks this offseason, they poured all their money, and probably more of it yet to come with Jeff Simmons' contract on the horizon, into that front four to try and make sure that they could continue to affect the quarterback, particularly Matt Ryan, with a little bit lack of mobility.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, Matt Ryan needs to be protected. That's the bottom line. And I think, look, these coaches aren't stupid. You know that, Buck. They know that. So the pass game will take that into account. Obviously, when it's third and long, it's different. But overall, the pass game will take that into account. And they'll have Ryan get rid of the ball quick. It'll be a timing rhythm pass game. And they'll try to compensate or camouflage for what could be a potential weakness at left tackle.
Greg, I appreciate the time as always. A pretty good conversation. Always a good conversation with our buddy Greg Cosell at NFL Films. Make sure that you subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. Like an Uber driver. We haven't done that pitch in a while, Greg, so we might as well try and pick up some 5-star reviews while we're at it. Appreciate the time as always, my friend.
Thanks, Buck.